The security guard at the children's hospital worked nights, never spoke much, just nodded politely and kept walking. Until one night, a young doctor noticed the way he moved, and the faded scar across his knuckles told a story no one expected. Welcome to Story with Horshi. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden service and quiet heroism, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. St. Mary's Children's Hospital sat on the edge of downtown, its windows glowing softly against the night sky. Inside, the halls were quieter than most places, filled with the gentle hum of machines and the soft whispers of night staff caring for the smallest patients. It was the kind of place where hope and heartbreak walked hand in hand, where miracles happened in rooms painted with cartoon characters. The night security guard had been there for 3 years. His name was Robert Chen, though most of the staff just called him Bob. He was in his early 60s, average height with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to hold more than they revealed. He wore the standard navy blue uniform, walked his rounds with quiet precision, and never caused any trouble. Bob arrived every evening at 10 p.m. sharp, signed in with his careful handwriting, and began his rounds. He knew every corner of the hospital, every door that squeaked, every light that flickered. He moved through the halls like a ghost, checking locks, monitoring entrances, ensuring that the children sleeping in their beds were safe from the outside world. The staff respected him. He was reliable, professional, and had a way of appearing exactly when needed. When worried parents wandered the halls at 3 a.m., unable to sleep, Bob would quietly guide them to the family lounge and make sure they had coffee. When a child's toy rolled under a bed during the night, Bob would retrieve it without being asked. He never spoke much, but his presence was comforting. Dr. Sarah Martinez had been working at St. Mary's for 2 years. She was a pediatric resident, driven and compassionate, often pulling double shifts because she couldn't bear to leave her young patients. She'd seen Bob countless times during her night shifts, always professional, always present, but they'd never really spoken beyond polite nods and brief greetings. That changed on a Tuesday night in October. Dr. Martinez was finishing her rounds in the ICU when she heard shouting from the emergency entrance. A trauma case was coming in, a 7-year-old boy injured in a car accident. As she hurried toward the sound, she noticed Bob moving in the same direction, but something was different about his movement. Gone was the casual, steady pace of a security guard. Bob was moving with purpose, with precision, with the kind of controlled urgency she'd only seen in combat medics. His shoulders were squared, his eyes scanning, his hands ready. It was subtle, but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. The ambulance arrived with sirens wailing. The boy was unconscious, bleeding from a head wound, his small body broken and fragile. The trauma team sprang into action, but in the chaos of the moment, the child's mother collapsed in the waiting area, overcome with shock and grief. Bob was there instantly, not as a security guard, not as hospital staff, but as something else entirely. He knelt beside the woman, his voice calm and steady, his hands gentle but firm as he helped her to a chair. But it wasn't just his bedside manner that caught Dr. Martinez's attention. It was the way he assessed the woman's condition, checked her pulse, positioned her to prevent shock, all while speaking to her in a voice that somehow conveyed both authority and compassion. "Ma'am, I need you to breathe with me," Bob said softly. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. Your boy's in good hands. The doctors here are the best." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that suggested he'd spoken them before, in much worse circumstances. As the woman's breathing stabilized, Bob caught Dr. Martinez watching him. For just a moment, their eyes met, and she saw something there, a depth of experience, a familiarity with crisis that went far beyond hospital security. Then the moment passed, and Bob stood up, quietly returning to his post as if nothing had happened. But Dr. Martinez couldn't shake what she'd seen. Over the next few nights, she found herself paying closer attention to Bob. The way he moved wasn't just professional, it was tactical. He cleared corners without thinking about it, positioned himself with clear sight lines, and seemed to constantly assess his environment for threats that probably didn't exist in a children's hospital. More telling were the details she started to notice. The way he never sat with his back to a door, the way he could move absolutely silently when needed, the way he always seemed to know exactly what was happening in every part of the hospital, as if he had some kind of sixth sense for danger. And then there were his hands, scarred, weathered, with calluses that didn't come from carrying flashlights and checking doors. These were hands that had seen real work, real conflict. The scar across his knuckles was particularly noticeable, a clean line that suggested it hadn't come from an accident. One night, about a week after the trauma case, Dr. Martinez was grabbing coffee from the break room when she found Bob already there, cleaning up a spill. He looked up and nodded politely as he always did, but this time she didn't let him leave. "Bob," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" He paused, his expression neutral but alert. "Of course, doctor." "That night with the car accident, the way you handled the mother." She hesitated, then continued. "You've done that before, haven't you? I mean, dealt with trauma situations." Bob was quiet for a long moment, his hands still holding the paper towels he'd been using. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "I've seen some things in my time, doctor. You pick up skills." "What kind of things?" Another pause, longer this time. Bob looked at her, seeming to weigh something in his mind. Finally he said, "I was a medic. Long time ago. Different circumstances." Dr. Martinez felt her heart skip. "Military?" Bob nodded once. "Navy, hospital corpsman, served with the Marines." The pieces started falling into place. Hospital corpsmen were the medics who served with Marine units, often in the most dangerous situations. They were trained not just in medicine, but in combat, in survival, in keeping people alive under fire. The Marines called them Doc and trusted them with their lives. "Where did you serve?" she asked softly. "Multiple deployments, Iraq, Afghanistan, other places." His voice was even, but there was something in his eyes that suggested those other places had been particularly difficult. Dr. Martinez understood why he was being vague. Special operations medics often couldn't talk about their missions, their locations, or even their units. But the way he carried himself, the skills she'd witnessed, the quiet competence, it all made sense now. "How long?" she asked. 22 years. Retired in 2018. "And you came here?" Bob's expression softened slightly. "Wanted to keep helping people, kids especially, after everything I'd seen." He trailed off, then continued. "These kids, they're fighting their own battles. Different kind of war, but still a war. Figured I could help watch over them." Dr. Martinez felt tears welling in her eyes. This man, who could have parlayed his experience into a high-paying private security job or a comfortable desk position, had chosen to work nights at a children's hospital for security guard wages simply because he wanted to keep helping people. "Bob," she said, "what was your rate in the Navy?" "Your job title?" He hesitated, then answered quietly. "HM1. Petty Officer First Class, but I was attached to Special Operations units for most of my career. MARSOC primarily. MARSOC. Marine Special Operations Command, the elite of the elite." Dr. Martinez knew enough about the military to understand that medics attached to Special Operations units were themselves special operators, trained to provide medical care in the most extreme conditions imaginable. "How many lives do you think you saved?" she asked. Bob's smile was sad. "I tried not to keep count, but I lost count of the ones I couldn't save. That's what you remember. Over the following weeks, Dr. Martinez began to see Bob differently, not just as a security guard, but as a guardian in the truest sense. She watched him interact with the children during his rounds, saw how he could calm a frightened child with just his presence, how he seemed to know instinctively when a parent needed comfort or when a situation was about to escalate. She also began to notice other things. Bob never took the elevator when he could take the stairs, keeping himself in condition. He knew basic Spanish, Arabic, and what sounded like Pashto, languages he'd picked up during his deployments. He could assess a medical situation faster than most doctors, though he was careful never to overstep his bounds. One night, a teenager was brought in after a drug overdose. While the medical team worked to stabilize him, his friends were in the waiting room, scared and high themselves. Bob approached them not as security, but as someone who understood their fear. He talked to them quietly, got them to call their parents, and somehow convinced them to let the hospital staff check them out as well. It was a masterclass in crisis intervention. Dr. Martinez realized that Bob wasn't just a security guard. He was a protector in the deepest sense of the word. He'd spent over 2 decades keeping Marines alive in combat zones, and now he was channeling that same protective instinct into keeping sick children safe. The story might have ended there, with Dr. Martinez simply appreciating Bob's hidden history and quiet service. But sometimes, the past has a way of making itself known. It was a Thursday night in November when 3 men entered the hospital through the emergency entrance. They were dressed casually, but something about them set off every alarm in Dr. Martinez's head. They moved with purpose, scanning the area, and one of them kept his hand inside his jacket in a way that suggested he was carrying something. The hospital had protocols for threats, but these men hadn't done anything overtly threatening yet. They approached the information desk and asked about a patient, a young boy whose father was apparently involved in some kind of legal trouble. The desk clerk, following protocol, explained that patient information couldn't be given out without proper authorization. Dr. Martinez watched from the nurse's station as the men's demeanor changed. They became more aggressive, more insistent. One of them leaned over the desk in a way that was clearly intimidating. The night supervisor was called, but Dr. Martinez could see the situation escalating. That's when Bob appeared. He didn't announce himself, didn't call for backup. He simply materialized beside the men, his presence shifting the entire dynamic of the situation. The 3 men turned to look at him, and Dr. Martinez saw something pass between them. A recognition, a calculation, an understanding that they were no longer dealing with hospital staff. "Gentlemen," Bob said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that filled the space around him, "I'm going to need you to step back from the desk." The leader of the 3 men straightened up, his eyes narrowing. "And who are you?" "I'm security," Bob replied. But there was something in his tone that suggested he was much more than that. "And you're making our staff uncomfortable." The man's hand moved inside his jacket, and Dr. Martinez's blood ran cold. But Bob didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward, positioning himself between the men and the desk, his body language shifting into something that was unmistakably tactical. "I don't think you want to do that," Bob said, his voice still calm, but with an edge that made it clear he wasn't just a security guard anymore. "Not here. Not with children upstairs." The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. The 3 men looked at Bob, saw something in his eyes that made them reassess their situation, and slowly backed away. The leader pulled his hand out of his jacket, empty, and nodded to his companions. "We'll be back," he said, trying to maintain some authority. "No," Bob replied simply. "You won't." The men left, and Bob immediately went to the desk to check on the staff, then made a quick call that Dr. Martinez realized was to the police. Within minutes, unmarked cars were positioned around the hospital, and the night passed without further incident. Later, Dr. Martinez approached Bob during his rounds. "How did you know?" she asked. "Know what?" "That they were armed, that they were dangerous." Bob was quiet for a moment. You spend enough time in places where everyone's armed and dangerous, you learn to read the signs, body language, positioning, the way someone carries themselves. Those men weren't here for a visit. What would you have done if they'd drawn weapons? Bob's expression was serious. Whatever was necessary to protect the people in this hospital, especially the children. Dr. Martinez realized that Bob's years of protecting Marines in combat zones had never really ended. He'd simply found a new mission, a new group of people to protect. The children of St. Mary's were his unit now, and he would defend them with the same dedication he'd once shown to his fellow Marines. Word of the incident spread quietly through the hospital. The staff began to look at Bob differently, with a deeper respect and understanding. He was still the same quiet, professional security guard, but now they knew that their safety was in the hands of someone who had literally made a career out of keeping people alive in the most dangerous situations in the world. Dr. Martinez began to understand that heroes don't always wear capes or carry weapons. Sometimes they wear security guard uniforms and walk quiet rounds through hospital corridors. Sometimes they're the person who helps a grieving mother, who calms a frightened child, who stands between danger and the innocent. Bob continued his rounds, continued his quiet service, never asking for recognition or praise. He was exactly what he appeared to be, a security guard at a children's hospital. But he was also something more, a guardian, a protector, a man who had found a way to continue serving something greater than himself. And sometimes, when Dr. Martinez worked the night shift and saw Bob making his rounds, she would think about all the children sleeping safely in their beds, watched over by a man whose own battles had prepared him to protect their dreams. The true heroes, she realized, are often the ones who never tell their stories. They're the ones who simply show up, do their job, and make the world a little safer for the people who never know what they've been protected from. Bob Chen was one of those heroes, a quiet guardian in a security guard's uniform, carrying 22 years of service and sacrifice into a children's hospital, where his mission continued one night shift at a time. So tell me, have you ever encountered someone whose quiet service ran deeper than what you could see? Someone who protected and served without asking for recognition? Share their story in the comments below. These stories matter, and they deserve to be told. Thank you for watching Story with Jorge. Subscribe if you believe in honoring the quiet heroes who walk among us, and I'll see you in the next story.